Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. We have talked extensively about this Clemson football team heading into 2025, and there are legitimate national championship expectations around this program in the 2025 year. And I'll just come out and say those expectations, they're high, but they're warranted. I mean, I don't think there's many programs that have a better roster than Clemson going into 2025. I don't think there's many programs that have a better coaching staff than Clemson going into 2025. Like, it starts with Dabo Swinney, one of the few head coaches that has won a national championship, that knows what it feels like, that knows what it looks like. And then you look at the college football landscape as we sit in the middle of May. Look, there's going to be a lot of good college football teams in the 2025 year. You got a lot of question marks at the top of the sport. When you look at a team like Georgia, a team that's always in contention for national championship, new quarterback, question marks on the offensive line, replacing legitimate difference makers on the defensive side of the football. You look at a team like Texas, who I think is one of, if not the best teams in the country going into the 2025 year. A lot of excitement about Arch Manning. Brand new offensive line that they're working in with some young wide receivers. I look at this Clemson football team and say, that there just are not that many question marks about this football team, and it becomes very easy to sell yourself on this team going into 2025. If I were to give my 30-second elevator pitch, it starts with, like, you got a quarterback that is top 3 in Heisman odds heading into 2025, with an offensive line that is extremely veteran, have played a lot of football together over the last couple of years, with what I think might be the best wide receiver trio in the sport. And then you go to the defensive side of the football and say, look, this is a defense that has multiple first round NFL draft picks, specifically on the defensive line, a very talented secondary, one of the more talented linebackers in the country in Sammy Brown. Oh, yeah, with what I think is one of the best defensive coordinators in the sport taking over the defense. It's very easy to sell yourself on this Clemson team in 2025. Now, the conversation that we haven't really gotten into a ton is, all right, what are Clemson's biggest question marks in the 2025 year? I would argue that they're the team right now that we have the least amount of question marks about going into 2025. But if Clemson goes out and achieves their goals of winning a national championship, what are the questions that we need to see answered? That's the question mark I want to get into today. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the Clemson fans, I want to start with this, just a thank you and appreciation for how much y'all have rocked with the boys over the last couple of weeks and months. It's been extremely fun talking about this team heading into 2025. It's going to be a very fun 2025 college football season. Can't thank you guys enough for all the support. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it now. At least in my opinion, the biggest question mark we have for Clemson is not what the run game is going to look like in general. My biggest question mark is, can you run the football effectively in the biggest moments? Because that's really what got Clemson into trouble, especially later on in the season. Now, it's important to mention, like, your running back one, your workhorse Phil Maffa, was clearly not 100% towards the end of the season. But you even look at a game like Georgia week 1. This was a Clemson team that when they played some of the best teams in the sport, with some of the best front sevens in the sport, they struggled to have a run game on offense. You look at winning games in the college football playoffs, you look at winning a national championship, you're going to see a lot of good front sevens. And I'm not saying Clemson has to run the football for 200 plus yards against a team like Georgia or against a team like Texas in the college football playoffs, but you do have the ability to be two-dimensional and able to lean on the run game at least just a little bit in the college football playoffs against some of the best teams in the sport. Because you go back to that Texas game, Cade Klubnik played about as good as he could play. Just didn't really have a run game to work off, and those Texas defensive linemen were just pinning their ears back and getting after the quarterback. When you play those elite front sevens, you got to have a run game to somewhat lean on. Now, when you're asking the question of, does Clemson have a run game to lean on in the biggest moments? There are two things you have to address. Number one, the running back room. I think it starts with these two at the top, Gideon Davidson and Adam Randall. Like, what do we get from Gideon Davidson as a true freshman? What do we get from Adam Randall making that transition from wide receiver to running back? Two guys that you got some really positive returns from during spring practice. You probably throw a guy like David E into that mix as well. Number one is the running backs. Do you have a deep enough room? Do you have a talented enough room to lean on the run game? But then secondly, it's the offensive line. An offensive line that, in my opinion, took some massive steps in 2024, but probably still wasn't an elite level offensive line. Can you be elite in 2025? I think you have the personnel to. You look at a guy like Tristan, you look at a guy like Blake Miller. Those are two tackles that I think will be selected pretty dang high in the NFL draft. You look at the inside of the offensive line, you have a combination of veterans, guys like Walker Parks, but you also have some young talent that we think is going to emerge in 2025, guys like Elijah Thurman, guys like Harris Sewell. This offensive line was solid year one under Matt Luke. You saw significant steps being taken from that 2023 season. Can you take another step from 2024 to 2025? Can you become an elite offensive line that can move bodies around against some of the best defensive fronts in the country? That's, I think, where it starts. Number two, and I'm not even sure how much this matters. What does the tight end play look like? And we all know a guy like Jake Bringenstow played a massive role in the Clemson offense over the last couple of years, was the second leading. It had the second most targets, is probably the best way to put it. Second most targets on this Clemson offense last year next to Antonio Williams. The tight end spot's been a very important part in this Clemson offense for the last couple of years. You kind of have a question mark about, do you have a difference maker at tight end? Now, the name that I would point to in terms of the potential difference maker is Christian Bentacore going into his redshirt freshman year. This was a guy that generated significant buzz last year at this time. Wasn't really able to crack the football field during his freshman year. Probably had a large part to do with an NFL tight end and Jake that was in front of him. This kid has a very similar skill set to what Jake Bringenstow gave to Clemson. Can he be that guy in 2025? Now, even if that's not the case, my question is, does the tight end play even matter all that much? Because I look at the wide receiver room and say, you got five guys that you probably really, maybe six, that you really want to get on the football field. I think over the last couple of years, Clemson leaned on the tight end so much because they didn't have all that great of wide receivers. That's a different story going into 2025. Like, maybe the tight end play doesn't even have a huge factor in this Clemson offense because of how deep and how talented your wide receiver room is. Maybe you see more four wide receiver sets where we don't even have a tight end on the football field. You go back to Coach Riley's time at TCU, when they had talented wide receivers, tight ends didn't play a huge part in that TCU offense. I think it'd be real, and certainly help Clemson to have a guy like Christian Bentacore step up and be a all ACC caliber tight end. My question is, does that even matter all that much because of how talented these wide receivers are? Any way you look at it, it's a veteran offensive line with a Heisman caliber quarterback with one of the best wide receiver rooms in the country. If that run game comes along, this offense is going to be one of the better offenses that we see in the sport, which is something we haven't said about Clemson in a very long time in the preseason. Going over the defensive side of the football, I really care about one thing, and that is this defensive front. Can they not only be good? Like, we know this Clemson defensive line is going to be good. Like, how good can they be? Can they be national championship level defensive line? Because you look at every single team that has won a national championship over the last couple of years, they all have had elite defensive lines. Now, they've all won national championships in different ways. Like, Ohio State won a national championship in a different way than Michigan did, in a different way than Georgia did previously. What's the common denominator between all of those three football teams? Elite defensive lines. Tom Allen, with this defensive line, what does it look like specifically when it comes to negative plays? TJ Parker, Peter Woods, like, those are two guys that have a good chance of going top 15 in the NFL draft in 12 months. DeMonte Capehart, to me, is one of the most underrated defensive linemen in this sport. Will Helt sounds like a massive hit in the transfer portal. My bigger question is, hey, what do we get from the role players on this defensive line? I'm talking about a guy like Cade Denhoff. I'm talking about a guy like Jaheim Lawson or a guy like Stephylin Green on the inside, guy like Amari Adams as a true freshman. Because not only did those elite defensive lines that we talk about winning national championships have, first round NFL talent, they also were extremely deep that allowed them to play their best football in November and December. Does Clemson have the adequate depth on the defensive line is another very important talking point for Clemson going into the 2025 year. This is a football team that the reason that you see them in top fives and top threes, in some cases, I believe Josh Pate had them as the number one team in the country going into 2025. They are a top five team consensus for a very good reason. They're one of the teams, if not the team, that you have the least amount of question marks about. And then the question is, hey, those lingering questions, those things that, allow you to jump up to be a national championship team, do we answer those questions along the way in 2025? That's the question we have for Clemson. Those are the three things that I'm looking for the most. I would probably add a last one and say this secondary, does it come together and not give up as many? It was a very good secondary, but sometimes would have some busting coverages. Can we be a little bit more consistent in the back end, especially year one with Tom Allen? Very, very good football team. Not a lot of questions. Like the conversation we're having with Clemson is not, is this team good enough to make the college football playoffs? Is this team good enough to win a national championship? I think you answered the three questions we just talked about. Very good chance Dabo Swinney's lifting up that trophy in the middle of January this year. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.